I'm 61 years old, and for the past 30 years, I've been hiding something in the woods behind my property that would change everything we think we know about what lives in these forests. In a reinforced shelter I built in 1994, carefully concealed beneath years of overgrowth and deliberate camouflage, lives a creature that hunters have been tracking for decades, not to prove it exists, but to silence it forever. Her name is Nora. At least, that's what I call her. She's a Bigfoot, nearly 8 feet tall, and when I found her caught in an illegal trap on my land in March 1994, injured and terrified, I thought I was just saving an animal from suffering. I didn't realize I was protecting a witness. What she's shown me over 3 decades, the warnings she's tried to communicate, the others like her that have disappeared, the pattern of hunters who aren't hunting for proof, it's kept me up at night for longer than I care to admit. This is the story of why I finally decided to break my silence, even knowing what it might cost both of us. March 12th, 1994. I was 31 years old, recently widowed, working as a wildlife rehabilitation specialist for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. My husband Michael had died in a car accident 8 months earlier, and I'd requested a transfer to the most remote posting I could find, a monitoring station on a 160 acres of protected forest land in the Siskiyou Mountains, about 40 miles outside of Grants Pass. The isolation suited my grief. I could go weeks without seeing another person, just me and the injured animals I was rehabilitating before release back into the wild. That morning started like any other. I was doing my rounds, checking the perimeter of the property for signs of poachers. Illegal trapping was a constant problem in these mountains, people setting snares for bobcats and foxes to sell the pelts. I'd found 3 traps already that winter and destroyed them all. But this time, when I pushed through a dense thicket of manzanita about half a mile from my cabin, I heard something that made me stop dead. Breathing. Heavy, labored, and distinctly not the sound of any animal I'd ever treated. The trap was a leg hold, the cruel kind with serrated edges anchored to a tree with heavy chain. And caught in it was something I couldn't immediately process. My brain tried to categorize it, bear maybe, but the proportions were wrong. The limb caught in the trap was too long, too humanoid, dark brown fur matted with blood. And when I moved closer, when I finally saw the whole picture through the undergrowth, my legs went weak. She was curled on her side, trying to make herself small, one leg twisted at an angle that made my stomach turn. 8 feet tall, maybe more if she'd been standing, covered in thick fur except for the palms of her hands. And they were hands, with fingers, with what looked like deliberate gestures of pain. Her face was turned away from me, and she was making a sound I'd never heard before, low, keening, almost like crying, but deeper, more resonant. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, and she flinched at my voice. Her head turned toward me, and I saw her eyes for the first time, amber, almost golden, and filled with an intelligence that stopped my breath. Not animal intelligence, something else. Something that was looking at me and understanding that I was human, that humans had done this to her, that I might do worse. Every instinct told me to run, to get back to my cabin, call my supervisor, report this to someone with more authority and better judgment than a grief-stricken widow who could barely take care of herself. But I couldn't move, because I recognized that look in her eyes. It was the same look I'd seen in my bathroom mirror every morning for 8 months, the exhaustion of something that had been running from pain for too long and didn't know if it could keep going. I set down my pack slowly, keeping my movements small and predictable. "Okay," I said quietly, not even knowing if she could understand tone or if I was just trying to calm myself. "Okay, I'm not going to hurt you, but that trap, we need to get that trap off." She watched me, her chest heaving, her whole body trembling, and I realized with a sick feeling that this wasn't the first trap she'd encountered. The scars on her arms, barely visible under the fur, those were old trap marks. Someone had been hunting her, maybe for years, maybe her whole life. That's when I made the choice that would change everything. I didn't call for help, didn't report what I'd found. I just opened my pack, pulled out my bolt cutters, and started working on the chain that held her prisoner. Because in that moment, looking into those intelligent, terrified eyes, I understood something fundamental. Whatever she was, wherever she'd come from, she deserved more than to be discovered, studied, turned into proof of something impossible. She deserved a chance to survive, and I was the only one who could give her that chance. The first 72 hours were the hardest. I'd moved Nora, though I didn't call her that yet, didn't call her anything except the creature in my own mind, into an old equipment shed about 200 yards from my cabin. The shed was sturdy, built to store heavy machinery with concrete floors and reinforced walls. I'd cleaned out the rusted equipment, laid down tarps and old blankets, and set up the strongest portable animal cage I had, the kind designed for injured bears. But looking at her huddled in that cage, trembling despite her massive size, I knew this wasn't like treating an injured cougar or an orphaned fawn. Her leg was badly damaged. The trap had cut through muscle and possibly fractured bone. I'd managed to splint it after cutting her free, working as quickly as I could while she watched me with those amber eyes that never blinked, never looked away. She'd let me do it, let me touch her, but I could feel the tension in her body, the way every muscle was coiled and ready to bolt or fight. She was tolerating my help because she had no other choice, and we both knew it. I brought her food, raw vegetables at first, then fruits, then some cooked chicken, and left it just inside the cage door before backing away to the far wall of the shed. She wouldn't eat while I was watching. I'd have to leave, close the door, wait 30 minutes, and when I came back, the food would be gone. I started talking to her during these visits, not because I thought she understood the words, but because the silence felt too heavy, too loaded with fear. "I'm just going to check your splint," I'd say, or "I brought you some apples today. These are good ones, Honeycrisp." My voice seemed to help, or at least didn't make things worse. On the second night, I made a mistake. I'd brought her water in a large metal bowl, the same kind I used for the bears and deer I rehabilitated, and I'd set it down inside the cage, too close to where she was lying. She'd flinched away from it violently, slamming her injured leg against the cage bars, and the sound she made, God, that sound, it was pure terror. Not aggression, not warning, just fear so profound it felt like it filled the entire shed. I grabbed the bowl immediately, my hands shaking. "I'm sorry," I said, backing away. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean..." And then I stopped, because I realized what I'd done wrong. The bowl was metal, shiny, reflective, and the way she was staring at it, the way her whole body had gone rigid, I understood with a sick certainty that metal things had hurt her before. That whatever she'd experienced before I found her, it had involved restraints, equipment, things that gleamed and caused pain. I left the shed and went back to my cabin, traded the metal bowl for a plastic bucket, and when I returned, she was still pressed against the far corner of the cage, still trembling. I set the bucket down outside the cage this time, pushed it toward her slowly with a broom handle so I didn't have to get too close. "Plastic," I said quietly. "Just plastic. Nothing that's going to hurt you." She looked at the bucket, then at me, and I saw something in her expression that broke my heart. She was trying to assess whether this was a trick, whether my kindness was just a prelude to something worse. And I realized that I wasn't just treating an injured animal. I was trying to help someone who'd been traumatized, someone who'd learned that humans meant pain and captivity and fear. That night, lying in my bed in the cabin, I thought about what I'd gotten myself into. I'd committed to hiding something that people would literally kill to find. I was treating injuries I wasn't qualified to treat on a being I couldn't take to a vet or a hospital. And every time I looked into those intelligent eyes, I saw someone who had every reason not to trust me but was trying anyway. Because survival sometimes means accepting help from the very thing you have the most reason to fear. I didn't know it then, but I was learning the most important lesson of the next 30 years. That trust isn't built in grand gestures. It's built in water buckets and gentle voices, in showing up every day, in noticing what causes fear and choosing differently, in being patient enough to let someone decide on their own terms that maybe, just maybe, you're different from the others who hurt them. 6 weeks after I found Nora, they came. It was late April, just after dawn, and I was carrying breakfast out to the shed when I heard vehicles, multiple vehicles, coming up the access road to my property. I froze, my heart hammering, because nobody just dropped by out here. The nearest neighbor was 11 miles away, and visitors always called ahead on the radio. These people hadn't called. I set down the food container and walked back toward my cabin, trying to look casual, trying to look like someone who had nothing to hide. 3 trucks, black or maybe dark blue, hard to tell in the early morning light. They pulled up to my gate and stopped, and 4 men got out. They weren't dressed like typical hunters. No orange vests, no camouflage, just dark tactical clothing, the kind you see on SWAT teams in movies. Professional, coordinated, and they were carrying equipment that made my mouth go dry. What looked like tranquilizer rifles, tracking devices, cases that could have held anything. The one who approached my gate first was older, maybe 50, with the weathered face of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Morning," he called out. "Sorry to bother you so early. I'm Thomas Wexler with Pacific Wildlife Management. We're tracking a dangerous animal in this area, possibly an escaped exotic, maybe a bear with aggressive behavior. Have you seen anything unusual on your property?" I forced myself to breathe normally, to keep my expression neutral. "No," I said, walking toward the gate but not opening it. "Nothing unusual. What kind of animal are you looking for?" "We're not entirely sure," Wexler said, and there was something in his tone that made me understand he was lying. "Large, possibly injured. It's been spotted in this area over the past few months. We've had reports from hikers, some concerning encounters. We're authorized to search properties in the area with owner permission, just to make sure it hasn't taken shelter in any outbuildings or—" "You won't find anything here," I interrupted, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm a wildlife specialist. If there was a dangerous animal on my property, I'd know about it." One of the other men, younger, with the build of someone who spent a lot of time in the gym, stepped forward. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this animal is extremely elusive. It knows how to avoid detection. We have specialized equipment that can—" I said no. My voice came out harder than I'd intended. "This is private property. You don't have a warrant, and I don't give permission for you to search." I could see the calculation happening in Wexler's eyes. He glanced back at his team, then at my cabin, then at the outbuildings visible from the gate. The shed where Nora was hidden was partially obscured by trees, far enough back that it wasn't immediately obvious. But if they pushed this, if they got aggressive or came back with actual legal authority, there was no way I could hide her. "We understand," Wexler said finally, his smile never wavering. "But I should tell you, this animal is dangerous. If you do encounter it, don't approach it, don't try to help it. Call us immediately." He pulled a card from his pocket and held it through the fence. I took it, my hand surprisingly steady. The card was plain white with a phone number and nothing else. No agency name, no logo, no address. "What agency did you say you were with?" I asked. "Pacific Wildlife Management," he repeated smoothly. But something about the way he said it, too rehearsed, too careful, told me it wasn't real. Or if it was real, it was a front for something else. They left after a few more minutes of pleasantries and veiled warnings, their trucks kicking up dust as they headed back down the access road. I stood at the gate long after they disappeared, staring at that blank white card, my heart still racing. These weren't animal control officers. They weren't even wildlife biologists. These were people who hunted for a living, and whatever they were hunting, they knew exactly what it was. I walked to the shed as soon as I was sure they were gone. Nora was pressed against the back wall of her cage, her eyes wide, her whole body rigid. She'd heard them. Of course she'd heard them, and the terror on her face told me everything I needed to know about who these men were and what they represented. "They're gone," I said quietly, kneeling down outside the cage. "They're gone, and they didn't find you. You're safe." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. They'd come to my property specifically. They were searching this area systematically, and that meant they had some idea, from tracks, from reports, from whatever intelligence network they were operating, that what they were looking for was nearby. I'd been telling myself that hiding Nora was temporary, that once her leg healed, I'd figure out what to do next. But sitting there in the shed, looking at her terrified face, holding a card with a phone number that led to people who definitely weren't trying to prove Bigfoot existed, they were trying to eliminate it, I understood something that would define the next 30 years of my life. This wasn't a rescue situation anymore. This was a permanent commitment. Because the alternative, calling that number, handing her over to men with tranquilizer guns and blank business cards, that wasn't protection. That was betrayal. And I'd already buried one person I loved. I wasn't ready to do it again, even if that person wasn't exactly human. It took another month before Nora trusted me enough to let me sit near her without the cage between us. By late May, her leg had healed enough that she could walk without limping, and I'd started leaving the cage door open during my visits, giving her the choice to stay inside or come out. One evening, I brought my dinner out to the shed, just a simple meal of rice and vegetables, and sat down on the floor, about 10 feet from the cage, eating slowly, not looking directly at her. After about 20 minutes, she emerged, cautiously, testing each step, watching me for any sign of threat. And then she sat down across from me, close enough that I could see the details I'd been too afraid to examine before. Her hands were what struck me first. They were massive, easily twice the size of mine, but the fingers were long and dexterous, with nails that had been worn down from climbing or digging. She held them in her lap, fingers interlaced, in a gesture that was so distinctly human it made my throat tight. And there were scars. Not just the trap marks I'd noticed before, but older ones, precise ones, running along her forearms in patterns that looked deliberate. I set down my fork, trying to keep my movements slow and unthreatening. "Can I see?" I asked quietly, gesturing toward her arms. I didn't expect her to understand, but she looked at my hand, then at her own arms, and after a long moment, she extended one toward me. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could see clearly in the lamplight I'd brought. The scars were surgical. There was no other word for it. Clean lines, evenly spaced, the kind left by scalpels and sutures. Someone had cut into her, systematically, in multiple places. And around her wrists, barely visible under the thick fur, were bands of scar tissue that formed perfect circles, restraint marks from being tied down repeatedly over a long period of time. "Jesus," I whispered. My hands were shaking. "Someone did this to you. Someone had you." I stopped because the word that came to mind was captive, and it felt inadequate for what I was seeing. This wasn't just capture. This was experimentation. This was someone treating a living, intelligent being like a laboratory specimen. Nora pulled her arm back, not quickly, but with a kind of resignation that suggested she'd shown this to others before and knew what reaction to expect. She made a sound then, low, almost like a sigh, but with a complexity that suggested language, or at least the attempt at communication. And then she did something that made my blood run cold. She pointed at the scars, then at the cage I'd kept her in, then at me. The message was clear. "Are you like them?" "No," I said immediately, my voice cracking. "No, I'm not. I would never..." But even as I said it, I felt the weight of the hypocrisy. I'd put her in a cage. I'd kept her confined, told myself it was for her safety, for her healing. But from her perspective, how different was I really from whoever had done this to her before? I'd been gentler, kinder, but I'd still taken away her freedom without asking if that's what she wanted. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I'm sorry I locked you in there. I thought you needed to be contained while your leg healed, but I should have..." I stopped because what should I have done? Let an 8-foot Bigfoot roam free in a shed? Built her a different space? The truth was, I'd been operating on instinct and fear, treating her like the wild animals I usually rehabilitated, not like someone who could think and feel and make her own choices about her care. Nora watched me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but maybe understanding. She pointed at the cage again, then at the open door, then at herself sitting outside of it. Then she made a gesture that took me a moment to interpret. She touched her leg, the one that had been injured, then touched her chest, then pointed at me. "You helped me heal." "I tried," I said, "but that doesn't make the cage okay." She tilted her head, studying me with those amber eyes, and I had the unsettling feeling that she was assessing my character, deciding whether I was worth trusting beyond this moment. Then she did something I'll never forget. She reached out, slowly, giving me time to pull away, and touched my face. Just a brief touch, her massive fingers surprisingly gentle against my cheek. It wasn't threatening. It was curious, maybe even affectionate, like she was trying to understand who I was beneath my fear and my good intentions. I sat very still, barely breathing, feeling the warmth of her hand, the calluses on her fingertips, and I understood that this was a gift. After everything she'd been through, after all the reasons she had to hate and fear humans, she was choosing to reach out, to make contact, to see if connection was possible. When she pulled her hand back, I felt the loss of that touch like a physical thing. "Thank you," I whispered, "for trusting me enough to try." That night, after I'd left the shed and returned to my cabin, I sat at my kitchen table and thought about those surgical scars, those restraint marks, the terror I'd seen in her eyes when the hunters came. Someone had kept her prisoner, had cut into her, studied her, treated her like an experiment. And when she'd escaped, because that's what must have happened, she'd escaped, they'd sent hunters to find her, not to prove she existed, not to study her in the wild, to recapture her, to drag her back to whatever hell she'd managed to break free from. I'd spent the past 2 months thinking I was protecting her from exposure, from becoming a media sensation or a scientific curiosity. But the real threat wasn't discovery, it was recapture. And those men with their tranquilizer guns and blank business cards, they weren't trying to prove anything. They already knew. They'd known all along. They just wanted their subject back. And I was the only thing standing between Nora and that fate. Summer 1994, and Nora had been with me for 4 months. We'd developed a careful routine. I'd come out 3 times a day with food, water, medical supplies when needed. She'd wait until I'd backed away before approaching. We existed in this careful dance of proximity and distance, trust building molecule by molecule. But one evening in late June, something shifted. I brought dinner as usual, set it down, started to back away. And Nora stood up, moved toward me instead of the food, and very deliberately, very carefully, she turned her back to me, showing me what she'd been hiding. The fur on her back was thinner than the rest of her body, and in the lamplight I could see why. Scars, dozens of them, crisscrossing her shoulders and spine in a pattern that made my stomach drop. These weren't accidental injuries or the marks of survival in the wild. These were systematic, organized. Someone had done this to her over and over again, in the same places, with the same careful precision. "Oh God," I whispered, moving closer without thinking. Nora stood perfectly still, her massive frame tense but not retreating. She was letting me see, choosing to show me. And I realized this was an act of incredible trust, showing vulnerability, exposing the evidence of her worst traumas to someone who was, fundamentally, the same species as the people who'd hurt her. I knelt down to get a better look, my hands hovering near her back but not touching, not yet. The scars formed a grid pattern about 2 inches apart, running from her shoulders down to her lower back. Injection sites, I realized with a sick feeling. Someone had been using her as a test subject, repeatedly injecting her with God knows what, documenting the results, mapping out her body like a laboratory specimen. "Can I touch?" I asked softly. Nora glanced back at me, then made a small gesture with her hand, the same one she'd started using when she wanted me to continue with something. Permission. My fingers traced the scars gently, feeling the raised tissue, the way some of them had healed poorly, leaving thick keloid formations. "They hurt you," I said, my voice breaking. "They hurt you so many times." Nora made that low sound again, the one that was almost like speech but not quite, and I heard the weight of years in it. This hadn't been weeks or months of captivity, this had been years, maybe her whole life. But it was what I found at the base of her neck that made my hands start shaking. A small, raised scar, perfectly circular, about the size of a quarter. I'd seen marks like this before in my work with wildlife. It was an implant site. Someone had put a tracking device or identification chip under her skin, probably when she was younger, smaller, easier to handle. "They tagged you," I said, my throat tight, "like livestock." I sat back on my heels, trying to process what this meant. The surgical scars on her arms, the injection grid on her back, the implant. This wasn't a capture and release situation. This wasn't even standard wildlife research. This was long-term captivity, ongoing experimentation, the kind of systematic study that required funding, facilities, institutional support. Nora turned around to face me, and I saw tears in her eyes, actual tears running down through the fur on her cheeks. I didn't know Bigfoot could cry, didn't know they had tear ducts, emotional responses complex enough to produce that kind of physical reaction, but she was crying, and it was the most human thing I'd ever seen her do. "I'm so sorry," I said, my own eyes filling. "I'm so sorry that happened to you." I wanted to ask her questions. Where had she been kept? How long? How had she escaped? But we didn't have the language for that yet, didn't have a way to communicate anything beyond basic needs and simple emotions. Instead, I did something I'd been too afraid to do before. I reached out my hand, palm up, offering contact. Nora looked at my hand for a long moment, then very carefully placed her massive palm against mine. The size difference was almost comical. My hand disappeared entirely in hers, but the gesture was unmistakable. Connection, trust, a choice to be vulnerable with each other. We sat like that for several minutes, hands touching, not speaking, just existing together in that shed with the weight of everything unspoken hanging between us. And I thought about Michael, about how he'd taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone who's suffered is just sit with them. Not try to fix it, not offer platitudes, just acknowledge that it happened, that it mattered, that you see them. When Nora finally pulled her hand away, she gestured toward the door of the shed, then toward the forest beyond. She wanted to go outside. It was the first time she'd expressed a desire for anything beyond food and safety, and I realized with a start that I'd been so focused on keeping her hidden, on protecting her from the hunters, that I'd essentially been keeping her in another cage. A nicer cage, sure, a safer one, but still a cage. "You want to go out?" I asked. "Into the woods?" Nora nodded. She'd learned that gesture from watching me and pointed more emphatically at the door. Every rational part of my brain said this was dangerous. What if someone saw her? What if the hunters had surveillance equipment nearby? What if she ran and didn't come back? But looking at her face, seeing the desperate hope there, I understood that safety wasn't the same thing as living. And after years of captivity, of being poked and prodded and studied, maybe what she needed most wasn't protection. Maybe it was choice. "Okay," I said, standing up. "Okay. But we have to be careful. We go at night, stay close to the property, and if we hear anything at all, we come straight back. Deal?" Nora made a sound that could have been agreement or joy, or relief, maybe all three. And as I opened the shed door and watched her step out into the twilight, breathing in the forest air with an expression of such profound relief it made my chest ache, I realized I'd been thinking about this all wrong. I wasn't keeping Nora safe by hiding her. I was keeping her alive, yes. But there's a difference between survival and living. And those scars on her back, they weren't just evidence of what had been done to her. They were a reminder that she'd already lost years of her life to people who saw her as an object. I couldn't give those years back, but I could make sure that whatever time she had left, however long this lasted, she had more than just safety. She had dignity. She had choice. She had something that almost looked like freedom. Even if that freedom was just a walk through the woods on my property under the cover of darkness with someone watching over her who'd finally started to understand what she needed most. August 1995, 17 months after I found Nora. My sister Claire showed up unannounced, driving 6 hours from Portland because I'd gone quiet, and she was worried. I hadn't been answering my phone regularly, too paranoid about saying the wrong thing, revealing something in my voice. I'd stopped visiting for holidays, always making excuses about work or weather or needing to monitor recovering animals. And Claire, who'd been my anchor after Michael died, who'd helped me through the darkest months of grief, wasn't accepting my excuses anymore. She was standing on my porch with an overnight bag and a look that said she wasn't leaving until she understood what was going on with me. "Claire," I said, my heart already racing, "you should have called. You would have told me not to come," she interrupted, pushing past me into the cabin, "which is exactly why I didn't call. Sarah, what the hell's going on with you? Mom's worried. I'm worried. You haven't been yourself since—" She stopped, her eyes softening. "Since Michael died, I know. But this is different. You're not just grieving anymore. You're hiding." I forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. I'm not hiding. I'm just busy with work. The rehabilitation program has been... Don't. Claire set her bag down and crossed her arms. Don't lie to me. I know you, Sarah. I know when you're keeping something from me. And you've been keeping something big for months now. She paused, studying my face. Are you sick? Is it medical? Because if something's wrong, you need to tell me. I'm not sick, I said quickly. And then, because I needed to redirect this conversation anywhere else, I added, I'm fine. Really. I've just been working a lot, long hours. You know how it is with injured animals. They need constant care. Claire walked to the window, looking out at the property, and my stomach dropped when her gaze landed on the equipment shed in the distance. What's in there? She asked. Just storage, I said too fast. Old equipment, supplies, nothing interesting. She turned to look at me, and I saw the hurt in her eyes. You're lying to me. Right now to my face, you're lying. When did we start doing that to each other? The accusation hung in the air between us, and I felt something crack inside my chest. She was right. Claire and I had never kept secrets from each other, not real ones. We'd been each other's support system our whole lives, through bad breakups, through my wedding, through Michael's death. And now I was standing in my cabin, lying to her face, and she knew it. Claire, I started, but I didn't know how to finish. What could I possibly say? Sorry, I've been distant because I'm hiding an 8-foot Bigfoot in my shed, and I can't tell you about it because knowing would put you in danger. There was no version of the truth I could offer that wouldn't make everything worse. Is it drugs? She asked quietly. Are you using? Because if you are, if that's what this is about, we can get you help. No judgment, just help. No, I said firmly. God, no, it's nothing like that. Then what? Her voice broke. What is so terrible that you can't tell your own sister? What are you protecting me from? The answer came out before I could stop it. You. I'm protecting you. Claire stared at me, confusion and hurt warring on her face. From what? From knowing things that would put you at risk, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. From being involved in something that could... I stopped, realizing I'd already said too much. Jesus, Sarah. Claire sat down heavily on my couch. Are you in trouble? Legal trouble? Is someone threatening you? Her eyes widened. Is this about Michael? Did something happen that you didn't tell us about? No, I said quickly. Michael's death was an accident. This isn't about him. Then what is it about? She was crying now, tears running down her face. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I've lost my sister. You're alive, you're here, but you're not really here. You're somewhere else, keeping secrets, pushing me away. And I don't know how to help you if you won't tell me what's wrong. I sat down next to her, my own eyes burning with unshed tears. I wanted so badly to tell her everything, to share the burden of this secret, to have someone who understood what I was dealing with, what I was risking. But I thought about those hunters with their tranquilizer guns. I thought about what they'd do if they knew someone else knew about Nora. And I thought about how much I loved my sister, how I couldn't bear the thought of putting her in danger just to ease my own loneliness. I'm dealing with something complicated, I said carefully. Something I can't explain right now, but I promise you, I'm not using drugs, I'm not sick, I'm not in legal trouble, and I'm not being threatened. I'm taking care of something that needs taking care of, and I need you to trust me on that. Claire looked at me for a long moment, searching my face. Are you safe? She asked finally. Yes, I said, and that was true. Physically, I was safe. Emotionally, mentally, that was more complicated. And you can't tell me what this is about? Not yet. Maybe not ever. I'm sorry. She wiped her eyes, her expression hardening. Okay, but I need you to understand something, Sarah. You're choosing this secret over your family, over me, and that hurts. That really, really hurts. I know, I said quietly. I'm sorry. Claire stood up, grabbed her overnight bag. I'm going to go. I drove 6 hours to check on you, but I can see I'm not wanted here. That's not true, I said, standing too. Claire, you're always wanted here. I love you. You're my sister. Then act like it, she said, her voice hard. Act like someone who trusts their family enough to let them in. Because right now, Right now you're acting like a stranger." She left, and I stood at the window watching her car disappear down the access road, tears streaming down my face. I'd hurt her, pushed away the one person who'd been there for me through everything, and I couldn't even explain why, couldn't give her a reason that would make it okay. That night, I went to the shed and found Nora watching me with those perceptive amber eyes. She made a questioning sound, tilted her head. She'd gotten good at reading my emotions, at knowing when something was wrong. "I lied to my sister today," I told her, sitting down heavily. "She came to check on me because she's worried, and I lied to her face, pushed her away to protect you." I looked at Nora, at this impossible being who'd become the center of my life. "And I don't know if I made the right choice. I don't know if keeping you secret is worth losing my family over." Nora moved closer, sat down beside me. She didn't touch me, didn't make any gesture of comfort. She just sat there, present, solid, real. A reminder of why I'd made the choice I'd made. Because she was someone too, someone who needed protection, who deserved safety, who'd already lost so much to people who saw her as less than human. But Claire was my sister, and I'd just chosen a Bigfoot over her. I didn't know if that made me loyal or just lost, but the choice was made, and I'd have to live with it, even if living with it meant living alone. By 1996, 2 years in, everything had changed. The shed had become Nora's space. I'd insulated it, added a wood stove for winter, brought in books and magazines and anything I thought might provide stimulation. But more importantly, we'd started to communicate. Not with words. I didn't know if she was capable of speech or just chose not to use it, but with drawings. It started when I noticed her tracing shapes in the dust on the concrete floor, always the same symbols, over and over. I'd brought her paper and pencils, not really expecting anything, and she'd started to draw. The first drawing was simple, a circle with lines radiating out from it. The sun, I thought at first. But she kept drawing it over and over, each time adding more detail. A circle with lines, then trees around the edges, then small figures among the trees. She'd tap the drawing, look at me with those amber eyes, make a sound deep in her chest that I'd learned meant urgency, importance, pay attention. "I don't understand," I admitted, sitting across from her with a dozen versions of the same drawing spread between us. "What are you trying to tell me?" Nora made a frustrated sound. I'd learned to recognize her different vocalizations by then, could tell frustration from fear, curiosity from contentment. She picked up a fresh piece of paper and drew more carefully this time. The circle, the radiating lines. But now she drew herself inside the circle, a large figure with distinctive proportions I recognized immediately. And outside the circle, surrounding it, she drew other figures, smaller ones, different shapes. "That's you," I said, pointing to the figure inside the circle. "In the center, and these others—" I stopped, my throat going tight. "Are these your family?" Nora's whole body went still. Then, slowly, deliberately, she nodded. It was a gesture she'd learned from me, from watching me respond to yes or no questions, and seeing her use it, seeing her confirm that these drawings represented something real, something she'd lost. It hit me like a physical blow. "Where are they?" I asked quietly. "Are they still alive?" She picked up the pencil again, her massive fingers gripping it with a delicacy that still amazed me. She drew a rectangle, walls, and a roof, a building. Then she drew bars across the windows. She drew figures inside, some large, some small, and then she drew herself outside the building, alone, separated. "You escaped," I said, understanding flooding through me. "You got out, but they didn't. They're still there." Nora nodded again, more emphatically this time. And then she did something that made my hands shake. She drew a line from herself to the building, a path, and she pointed at it, then at herself, then made a gesture I'd seen her make before when she wanted to go outside. She wanted to go back. She wanted to find them. "I don't know where they are," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "These drawings. Nora, I can't tell where this building is from these pictures, and even if I could, I don't know how we'd—" I stopped because the word I was about to say was rescue, and I didn't know if that was even possible. If her family was being held by the same people who'd experimented on her, who'd sent hunters to find her, how could I possibly get them out? But Nora wasn't finished. Over the next hour, she drew more. She drew mountains, distinctive peaks that I slowly realized might be actual landmarks. She drew a river winding through a valley. She drew a road leading to the building, and she marked specific features, a fallen tree, a rock formation, things that might help identify the location. She was creating a map, crude but detailed enough that someone who knew these mountains might be able to use it. "You remember all this?" I asked, awed. "From your escape? You remember the way?" She nodded, then drew something else. A calendar, or what I interpreted as a calendar. Marks in groups, dozens of them, years maybe. She tapped the building, then tapped the calendar marks. She'd been there for years, long enough to memorize every detail of the surrounding area, long enough to plan an escape route, long enough to know exactly how to find her way back. I gathered up all the drawings, looking at this story told in pencil and paper, and I felt the weight of what she was asking me. She wasn't just communicating for the sake of communication. She was asking for help. Asking me to use this information, to do something with it, to not let her family remain in captivity while she lived in relative safety. "Nora," I said carefully, "even if I could find this place, even if these drawings are enough to locate it, what am I supposed to do? Call the police? They'd want to know how I know about it. They'd want proof. And providing proof means exposing you." She made a sound, low and broken, and I saw tears forming in her eyes again. She pointed at the drawing of her family, then at herself, then brought both hands to her chest in a gesture of anguish so human it made my own eyes burn. "I know," I whispered. "I know they matter to you, but I don't know how to help them without losing you. And I can't—" I stopped, swallowed hard. "I can't lose you too." The truth was out before I could censor it. I couldn't lose her. Over 2 years, Nora had become more than just a being I was protecting. She'd become a companion, a presence that filled the loneliness Michael's death had left behind. Our evening conversations, even without shared language, meant something to me. Her trust meant something. The way she'd look at me when I entered the shed, the small sounds of greeting she'd make, the careful way she'd accept food from my hands now instead of waiting for me to back away, all of it had become essential to my life. But her family was essential to hers, and every day she spent safe with me was another day they spent in captivity. Nora reached out and took my hand, something she did more freely now, and squeezed gently. Then she picked up a pencil and wrote something on a fresh piece of paper, letters painstakingly formed that I'd been teaching her over the past few months. She'd learned the alphabet, learned to copy words I wrote out for her, but this was the first time she'd written something on her own without prompting. Help them 2 words. Simple, direct. A plea from someone who'd learned just enough of my language to ask for the one thing I didn't know how to give. I looked at those words, at the drawings scattered between us, at Nora's face full of desperate hope, and I thought about what it must have cost her to learn too. Trust me enough to ask, to believe that maybe, just maybe, a human could be different, could choose to help instead of hurt. "I'll try," I heard myself saying. "I don't know how, and I don't know if I can do anything, but I'll try. I promise." It was a promise I had no idea how to keep, but looking at Nora's face, seeing the relief and gratitude there, I knew I had to figure it out, because she'd trusted me with her greatest vulnerability, not her physical scars or her fear of metal or her need for safety. She'd trusted me with her love for her family, with the knowledge that they were suffering, with the belief that I might care enough to do something about it. And maybe that trust, that faith in my humanity, despite everything her experience should have taught her, maybe that was worth risking everything for, even if I had no idea where to start. Spring 1998, 4 years since I found Nora, and I'd started paying attention to things I'd previously dismissed as coincidence. Missing person reports in the local paper, hikers who'd gone into the national forest and never come back, unexplained helicopter activity over protected wilderness areas, always at night, always unmarked, and hunters, not the regular deer or elk hunters who came through during season, properly licensed and loud. These were different, quiet, professional, equipped with gear that seemed military grade, They'd appear in clusters every few months, asking questions at the general store in town, showing photos of unusual animal tracks, offering money for information. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything. March 15th. 2 hikers reported missing near Cave Junction, last seen heading into the Kalmiopsis wilderness. March 28th, helicopter activity over my property at 2 a.m., spotlight sweeping the forest. April 3rd, 3 men in tactical gear at Miller's General Store asking Tom Miller if he'd seen large animal activity in the area, showing him photos of footprints that were clearly Bigfoot tracks, but which they claimed were from an escaped exotic animal. The footprints bothered me most. They weren't trying to prove Bigfoot existed, they already knew. They were trying to find specific individuals, and they were using a cover story that would make sense to locals without revealing what they were really hunting for. It was systematic, organized, funded by someone with enough resources to conduct ongoing search operations across hundreds of square miles of wilderness. One afternoon in late April, I was at the general store buying supplies when I overheard Tom talking to another customer. "Those fellas came back again yesterday," he said, shaking his head. "Same questions, different photos, offered me $500 for information about unusual tracks or sightings." $500? I told them I haven't seen anything, but hell, for that kind of money, I'm half tempted to make something up. "What did they look like?" the customer asked. "The tracks in the photos." "Big," Tom said. "Bigger than any bear I've ever seen. Humanoid, almost. Gave me the creeps, to be honest." He lowered his voice. "Between you and me, I think they're looking for one of those Bigfoot creatures. Not that I believe in that stuff, but what else could leave tracks like that?" I left the store with my hands shaking, my mind racing. They were getting bolder, offering money, showing photos. How long before someone remembered seeing me on my property, noticed I kept to myself, put together pieces that would lead them back to my shed? How long before one of those helicopters did more than just sweep the area, before they landed, searched, found Nora? That night, I showed Nora the newspaper articles I'd been collecting. Missing hikers, unexplained disappearances, all within a 50-mile radius of the Siskiyou Mountains. She looked at them with an expression I'd learned to read, recognition mixed with grief. She picked up her pencil and drew quickly, urgently. Figures like herself being chased, helicopters overhead, people with guns, and then something that made my blood run cold. She drew the figures being caught, put in cages, loaded into vehicles. "This is happening?" I asked, pointing at the drawing. "This is what's happening to the missing hikers?" Nora shook her head emphatically. She pointed at the figures she'd drawn, clearly Bigfoot, not human, then circled them. She drew an X through several of them. Then she wrote, in her careful childlike handwriting, "Not hikers. My kind." The implication hit me like a physical blow. The missing hikers weren't being taken. They were just unfortunate witnesses, people who'd seen things they shouldn't have seen. The real targets were others like Nora, other Bigfoot being hunted, captured, disappeared, and the missing person reports were just collateral damage. The human cost of a search operation most people didn't even know was happening. "How many?" I asked quietly. "How many of your kind have they taken?" Nora drew more figures, 7, 8, 9. She kept drawing until there were 15 figures on the paper. Then she stopped and looked at me with an expression of such profound sadness it made my chest ache. 15. In 4 years, they'd captured 15 individuals. And those were just the ones Nora knew about, the ones whose disappearances had somehow reached her through whatever communication network existed among her kind. I thought about the hunters who'd come to my property 4 years ago, about Wexler with his blank business card and his professional team. I thought about the helicopter sweeps, the systematic searches, the money being offered for information. This wasn't a research program. This was a harvest operation. They were collecting specimens, and they were doing it with the kind of efficiency that suggested they'd been doing it for a long time. "Where are they taking them?" I asked. "The ones they catch, where do they go?" Nora picked up the old drawings, the ones from 1996 with the building and the bars and the calendar marks. She tapped them emphatically, then wrote, "Same place, all same place." So there was a facility, somewhere in these mountains, where they were keeping all the captured individuals. The place Nora had escaped from, the place where her family was still imprisoned. And if 15 more had been taken since her escape, that meant the facility was active, ongoing, possibly expanding. I sat back, overwhelmed by the scale of what I was learning. "This is bigger than I thought," I said quietly. "This isn't just about you or even about your family. This is systematic. They're hunting your entire species." Nora nodded, then wrote something else. Why? It was a good question. Why go to such lengths, spend such resources, risk exposure by conducting these operations? Research was one answer. Studying an unknown primate species would be scientifically valuable. But the scope of this, the military-grade equipment, the organized searches, this felt like more than academic curiosity. I thought about the scars on Nora's back, the injection sites, the systematic experimentation. I thought about 15 more individuals being subjected to the same treatment. And I thought about something I'd read years ago, back in my wildlife biology courses, about how emerging diseases often jumped from animals to humans, about how studying these transmission vectors was considered vital for national security. "They're not just studying you," I said slowly, the realization forming as I spoke. "They're studying what you could carry, what diseases might exist in your population that could affect humans. They're treating you like a biological threat." Nora stared at me, and I saw understanding dawn in her eyes. She'd known they were experimenting on her, but maybe she hadn't understood why. Maybe she thought it was simple curiosity, the human need to understand and categorize. But this was darker. This was fear-based. They saw her kind not as intelligent beings deserving of study and respect, but as potential vectors for pandemic disease, as biological hazards that needed to be contained and controlled. And if that's what they believed, if that's how they justified this program, then there was no limit to what they'd do. No atrocity they wouldn't commit in the name of protecting human populations from a theoretical threat. I looked at Nora, at this gentle being who'd learned to trust me, who drew pictures and wrote careful words and cried over the loss of her family. And I thought about 15 more like her, locked in cages, being injected with God knows what, treated like lab animals in the name of national security. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry this is happening to your people, and I'm sorry I haven't done more to stop it." Nora reached out and took my hand, squeezed it gently. Then she picked up her pencil and wrote one more thing. "Not too late." But looking at those drawings, at the Yates, evidence of a systematic hunt spanning years, at the resources being deployed to capture and contain an entire species, I wondered if that was true, or if we were already too late, and I'd been hiding one individual while an entire population disappeared into the darkness. By 2000, 6 years in, I'd restructured my entire existence around Nora. I'd quit my job with Fish and Wildlife. Too many questions about why I spent so much time on my property, why I was so resistant to having colleagues visit. I started working freelance as a wildlife consultant, taking contracts I could complete remotely. I stopped dating entirely, couldn't imagine trying to explain to someone why half my property was off limits. I became known in town as the widow who'd gone a little strange, who kept to herself, who was friendly enough at the grocery store, but never accepted invitations to dinner or community events. My days had a rhythm now, built entirely around Nora's needs and safety. I'd wake at dawn, make breakfast for both of us. She'd developed a taste for oatmeal with berries, scrambled eggs, anything I'd make for myself. I'd bring it out to the shed, and we'd eat together, sometimes in silence, sometimes with me reading aloud from whatever book I was working through. We'd gone through Jane Austen, Steinbeck, even some science fiction that seemed to fascinate her. She couldn't read well enough yet to get through them on her own, but she'd listen with complete focus, occasionally stopping me to point at a word or ask me to explain a concept. Afternoons were for her physical needs, checking the shed for any maintenance issues, bringing fresh water, making sure the wood stove was stocked for the evening. But they were also for connection. We'd play chess. She'd gotten frighteningly good at it, better than me most days. Or I'd bring out National Geographic magazines, and she'd spend hours looking at the photographs, tracing the images of forests and mountains with her fingers like she was trying to reach through the paper to the places they depicted. One evening in May, I came out to find Nora standing by the window I'd installed in the shed the previous year, just a small one, positioned high enough that someone would have to be right up against the building to see inside. She was looking out at the sunset, her hand pressed against the glass, and the expression on her face made me stop in the doorway. It was longing, pure, aching longing for something she couldn't have. "You want to go outside?" I said quietly. It wasn't a question. She turned to look at me, and I saw the conflict in her eyes. Yes, she wanted to go outside, but she was also afraid. The last time we'd taken walks together, back in 1994 and 95, the hunters had been less aggressive, less frequent. Now they came through several times a year, and the helicopter sweeps had intensified. Going outside meant risk, and we both knew it. "We could go after dark," I offered, "just around the property, like we used to. Stay close to the trees." Nora made a sound, half hope, half fear. Then she wrote on the notepad we kept by her sleeping area. "Safe?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Probably not, but we could be careful." She looked back out the window, at the fading light, at the forest she'd been separated from for 6 years, except for those brief, cautious walks in the early days, and I realized, with a sick feeling, what I'd done. I'd built her a comfortable prison. Better than the facility she'd escaped from, certainly, but still a prison. She had books and magazines and chess and conversations and regular meals, but she didn't have freedom, didn't have autonomy, didn't have the ability to make choices about her own life beyond what I allowed. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice cracking. "I've been so focused on keeping you safe that I didn't think about what that safety was costing you. You're alive, but you're not really living, are you?" Nora turned from the window and crossed the shed to where I stood. She placed both hands on my shoulders, a gesture of comfort she'd started using after watching me do it to her during difficult moments. Then she picked up her pencil and wrote, "You saved me, not your fault." "But it is my responsibility," I said. "You're here because of choices I made, and those choices have consequences. For you, for your family still in that facility, for your entire species being hunted. And I've been too scared to do anything except keep you hidden and hope that's enough." The truth was out. The thing I'd been avoiding for years. I'd let fear turn me into exactly what I'd sworn I wouldn't be. Someone who prioritized her own comfort and safety over doing what was right. I'd documented the pattern of disappearances, watched the hunters operate, collected evidence of a systematic hunt. And I'd done nothing with that information except lock it away with Nora, keeping both of them hidden from the world. "What kind of life is this for you?" I asked. "Really? You spend your days in a shed, reading books about places you can't visit, looking at pictures of forests you can't explore. You play chess with the person keeping you captive, and you're grateful for it because it's better than the alternative. Is that really what you want?" Nora stared at me for a long moment, then she wrote something that broke my heart. "What I want doesn't matter. Only survive." "That's not true," I said fiercely. "What you want matters. Your life matters beyond just survival. You're not just a specimen to be protected. You're someone with thoughts and feelings and desires that go beyond just staying alive." She touched the window again, then wrote, "Want to run, want to find family, want to be free." "Then we'll find a way," I said, making a decision I should have made years ago. "I don't know how yet, but we'll find a way to give you more than this, more than hiding, more than just surviving." But even as I said it, I knew how hollow it sounded. 6 years of promising to help, 6 years of doing nothing except maintaining the status quo. I'd built a life around this secret, yes, but I'd also built a cage around both of us. Nora's was physical, mine was moral, and neither of us was really free. That night, after I'd returned to my cabin, I lay awake thinking about what my life had become. I was 37 years old. I'd lost my husband, alienated my sister, quit my career, and structured my entire existence around hiding a being I'd told myself I was protecting. But protection that required imprisonment, was that really protection? Or was it just another form of captivity with better intentions? I thought about Nora pressing her hand against the window, looking at a world she couldn't access. I thought about her family, still in that facility, still suffering. I thought about 15 others who'd been captured while I did nothing, and I realized that building a life around a secret wasn't the same as building a life worth living. For either of us, something had to change. I just didn't know what or how or whether I had the courage to actually do it. But the clock was ticking. Nora was getting older. The hunters were getting more aggressive. And every day I waited was another day that others suffered while I maintained my comfortable, careful, cowardly status quo. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow I'll figure out what to do. But I'd been saying that for 6 years. And tomorrow never seemed to come. Fall 2003, 9 years into this impossible situation. Nora had been drawing more frequently, her images becoming more detailed, more urgent. She'd learned to write basic words, not sentences but single words that carried enormous weight. Family, taken, others, hunt. And one evening in October, she created something that made my blood run cold. A map, crude but unmistakable, showing the Siskiyou Mountains, marked with X's at specific locations, 7 of them. And beside each X, she drew a figure like herself. Then, she drew hunters, stick figures with rifles, converging on each location. "These are current?" I asked, my hands shaking as I held the drawing. "This is happening now?" Nora nodded emphatically. She picked up her pencil and drew a calendar, marking off days. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 days ago. Then she drew one of the X's with a circle around it, and next to it she drew a figure like herself being put in a cage, loaded into a vehicle. She wrote, "Taken 4 days." "How do you know this?" I asked, though I'd started to suspect the answer months ago. "Nora, how are you getting this information?" She drew more, figures like herself, spread across the mountains and lines connecting them. A network. Then she tapped her head, made a complex gesture I'd seen before but never understood. She was trying to explain something about how her kind communicated. "You can sense them," I said slowly. "Other Bigfoot. You can sense when they're in distress, when they've been captured." Nora made an uncertain gesture. Close enough, maybe. But the implications were staggering. She'd been monitoring her entire species for 9 years, feeling their fear when hunted, their anguish when captured, their deaths. And she'd been carrying that knowledge alone, unable to do anything about it. "My God," I whispered. "You've been feeling all of this for years?" She nodded, tears in her eyes. She drew urgently now, like she'd been waiting 9 years to show someone. A timeline going back, 1994, when I found her, with many figures scattered across the mountains. Then, 1995, with fewer. 1996, fewer still. By 2003, only 12 figures remained, including herself. They've been systematically hunting them down for 9 years. Nora wrote, "Not just here, everywhere." She drew a map of the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, Northern California. She drew clusters of figures in each state, then systematically drew X's through them, year by year. A systematic elimination of an entire species. "How many are left, total?" Nora counted on her fingers. When she reached 50, she stopped and shook her head. She wrote, "Don't know. Less every year." This wasn't just about Nora's family. This was a species going extinct in real time, and I was one of maybe a handful of people who knew. And I'd spent 9 years doing nothing except keeping one individual safe while the rest disappeared. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Nora pointed at her written words scattered across months of drawings, the painstaking process of learning to communicate. She hadn't been withholding information. She'd been desperately trying to learn how to share it. She drew something else, herself, alone, in the shed. Then me, in my cabin. 2 isolated figures, safe but separate. Then the other figures on her map, scattered and dwindling, and a question mark over all of it. What are we doing? What's the point of surviving if everyone else is dying? "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I'm one person. I can barely protect you, let alone an entire species." She wrote, "Tell someone." "Tell who?" "Anyone I tell becomes a threat to your safety." Nora stared at me, then wrote, "My safety not most important." "It is to me," I said fiercely. I can't just sacrifice you to maybe help others I've never met. She drew a figure like herself, alone and safe. Then dozens of other figures suffering and dying. Then an arrow from the safe figure toward the others and wrote, "Choose." She was asking me to choose, her safety or their survival, my comfortable hiding or the risk of exposure that might make a difference. "You're asking me to risk you," she nodded, then wrote, "If not us, who?" "Okay," I heard myself saying. "I don't know how yet, but I'll find a way. I'll do something besides just hiding you." Winter 2005. 11 years of keeping this secret and I was starting to crack. I'd been documenting everything, and I'd started researching at the library in Grants Pass. Cryptid sightings, government wildlife programs, black budget operations. What I found made me wish I'd never started looking. Buried in obscure journals, partially declassified documents scattered across forums, there were patterns, references to primate research initiatives with funding that didn't match stated goals. A 1989 paper on cross-species pathogen transmission in novel hominid populations. Government contracts for specimen collection and containment with entire sections redacted. I started printing things out, never more than a few pages per visit. At home, I'd spread them across my table, looking for connections. And slowly, horribly, that picture came into focus. They weren't just studying Bigfoot, they were treating them as biological threats, potential carriers of diseases that could jump to humans. Every cryptid captured was tested, sampled, studied for pathogens. It was biodefense research conducted under cover of wildlife management, funded by black budget programs. I brought the printouts to Nora. "I think I understand now. They think you're dangerous, not because of what you are, but because of what you might carry. Diseases, viruses." Nora looked at words like pathogen vectors and containment protocols. She picked up her pencil and wrote, "They make us sick, then study. They infect you deliberately?" My hands were shaking. "That's not research, that's torture," she wrote. "Some die, they watch, take notes." "How many died while you were there?" She held up 4 fingers, then she pointed at her old drawings, circled 2 smaller figures, children, and drew X's through them. Her children. They died during the experiments. "I'm so sorry." But she drew more. Human figures getting sick, scientists with vials taking diseases from sick cryptids to humans. They're testing transmission, taking diseases from your kind and seeing if they can infect humans, weaponizing them. Nora nodded, then wrote, "They will use." I stared at this evidence, academic papers, budget documents, Nora's drawings, 11 years of documentation, proof of crimes against an entire species, proof of bioweapon research that violated every treaty and ethical standard. "I don't know what to do with this. Every option risks exposing you, and once you're exposed," Nora took my hand, then wrote, "Already exposed. They know I exist. Question is what you do with knowing. If I expose this, they'll come for you. Either way, I lose you." She stared at blank paper for a long moment, then wrote, "Already lost. Lost my children, lost my people, lost my freedom. What more can they take? Your life. I won't let that happen," she wrote. "Not your choice, my life, my choice." There it was, the question I'd been avoiding for 11 years. Who got to decide? I'd been making choices for Nora since I found her, protecting myself from having to make the hard choice. "What do you want me to do, really?" Nora didn't hesitate. She wrote, "Tell, stop them, save others, even if it costs me." By 2010, 16 years since I found her, something had changed in Nora. She moved more slowly, gray showing in her fur. She was aging, and I had no idea what the normal lifespan was for her kind. One November evening, I found her updating her map. She was erasing X's and replacing them with nothing, empty spaces where figures used to be. "They're gone? All of them?" She nodded, then held up 2 fingers, only 2 left besides herself. In 16 years, the population had been reduced from 12 to 3. "Where are the other 2? She pointed to her map, one far north, near the Oregon-Washington border, one east, toward the Cascades, separated by hundreds of miles, isolated. "Can you still sense them?" Nora made a gesture, barely, faintly. The connection was fading. Soon she'd be completely alone. I looked at this map documenting extinction. "I'm so sorry. I should have done something years ago." She placed her hand on my shoulder, then wrote, "Not your fault. You kept me alive. That is something. But it's not enough. Everyone else is gone while I sat on evidence." Nora was quiet, then wrote, "I asked you to wait. I was afraid too." "We've been each other's excuse," I said. "And meanwhile, they kept hunting." She nodded, crying, then wrote, "Maybe we were wrong. Maybe safety is not same as living. What do you want to do? If you could choose anything?" Nora pointed at the two remaining figures on her map, then at herself, then drew them all together. She wanted to find them, to not die alone. "That's impossible. We'd risk all three of you being captured," she wrote. "Already dying, already alone. What is risk?" "I don't know how we'd do it." Nora tapped her head, then her chest. She could sense them. She could find them if we got close enough. "If we do this, we can't come back here. This place won't be safe anymore. Do you understand?" She wrote. "Yes. Still want to try." "Okay. We'll try to find the others. Whatever happens after, we'll figure it out." It was probably suicide, but it was the first honest choice either of us had made in years, not choosing safety, choosing to actually try to do something meaningful. April 2015, 21 years in. I was 52 and I'd grown complacent. I was in town doing my monthly supply run when I overheard two men in the parking lot. They weren't locals. They were looking at a topographic map, my property. I froze, close enough to hear. The older one was tapping the map. "Thermal imaging picked up anomalies here. Heat signatures too large for bear, wrong movement patterns for elk." "Could be livestock," the younger one suggested. "On protected forest land, 40 miles from the nearest ranch? This is what we've been looking for. I want a team on site by tomorrow morning. If it's there, we'll know within 72 hours. My hands shook. 21 years of careful hiding, and they'd found us with aerial surveillance technology. I drove home faster than I should have and ran to the shed. Nora looked up, immediately reading my panic. "They're coming," I said. "The hunters. They have thermal imaging. They're sending a team tomorrow morning. We have maybe 12 hours. Nora stood slowly, looked at the window. Then she picked up her notebook and wrote, "Where do we go?" "I don't know. I should have had an escape route, a backup location, but I thought we were safe." She wrote, "Not your fault. They were always going to find us." She paused, then added, "Maybe time to stop hiding." "Stop hiding? They'll take you. Back to that facility, back to the experiments." She held up her hand, then wrote, "Only 3 left, including me. What is point of hiding if everyone else gone?" She was right. I'd kept her safe for 21 years while the rest had been systematically eliminated. The 2 others from 2010, I didn't even know if they were still alive. We'd talked about finding them 5 years ago, but I'd kept putting it off. "What are you saying? That you want to let them catch you?" "No," she wrote emphatically. Then, "Want to fight, want to expose, want to make them answer for what they did." I looked at this being who'd spent 21 years learning, growing, developing, not just intelligence, but consciousness, moral reasoning, a sense of justice. She wasn't asking to give up. She was asking to go on the offensive, to stop being prey and become a witness. If we do that, we can't control what happens next. You might end up in custody anyway, just different custody. You wouldn't be free. She wrote, "Not free now. Free is illusion. Question is whether my captivity means something." And there it was. The choice I'd been avoiding. Keep hiding and watch our illusion of safety crumble, or go public and hope sunlight was disinfectant enough. "Okay," I said. "We have 12 hours. Let's use them." I looked at this being who'd spent 21 years learning, growing, developing not just intelligence but consciousness, moral reasoning, a sense of justice that demanded accountability. She wasn't asking to give up. She was asking to go on the offensive. "If we expose you, expose them. Try to make this public. We can't control what happens next. You might end up in custody anyway, just different custody. You wouldn't be free." She wrote, "Not free now. Free is illusion. Question is whether my captivity means something, and there it was. The choice I'd been avoiding for 21 years. Keep hiding, keep running, or go public and hope that sunlight was enough of a disinfectant. I have evidence, I said. Your drawings, my research, records of the hunts. If we could get it to the right people, she wrote. Who are right people? I don't know, I admitted, but we have 12 hours to figure it out. I looked at Nora. Whatever we decide together. Your life, your choice. She reached out and took my hand. Then she wrote, scared, but also ready. Tired of hiding. I understood that feeling. Tired of living in fear, of checking over my shoulder, of structuring my entire existence around maintaining a secret that had cost me everything. My career, my family, my sister who hadn't spoken to me in years. Okay, I said, we have 12 hours. Let's use them. That night, we worked together like we never had before. I brought all my boxes, 21 years of newspaper clippings, research documents, photographs of the hunters. Nora organized her drawings chronologically, creating a visual narrative of extinction. Together, we wrote a statement, telling her story in her own words. By dawn, everything was packed, ready to be sent to multiple journalists, scientists, and advocacy organizations simultaneously. The hunters would be on my property in hours, but by then, the truth would already be out there. The aftermath changed everything. I'd managed to hide Nora in a cave system half a mile into the forest before they arrived. I met the hunters at my gate, played the confused property owner. They found nothing, but they left me with a card, an offer of money for information. I'd kept Nora in that cave for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of hiking out twice a day with food and water, paranoid that every bird call was surveillance. The cave was cold, damp, barely large enough for her to stand. No light except my flashlight, no comfort except blankets. When I finally brought her back, she was different, quieter, withdrawn. I'm sorry, I told her that first night back. I'm so sorry you had to go through that again. She showed me her notebook, pages and pages of the same words. Dark, cold, alone, dark, cold, alone. God, Nora, my hands were shaking. I didn't know it was that bad. She wrote, safe not same as okay. It was a distinction I'd been failing to understand for 21 years. I'd been so focused on keeping her physically safe that I'd ignored what that safety cost her psychologically. What do you want me to do differently? I asked. She wrote, can't. Safe and free not possible together anymore. Maybe never were. Then what? If I can't keep you safe and free at the same time, what am I supposed to do? She stared at me for a long moment. Then she wrote, not your choice to make anymore. My life, my risk, my decision. Okay, I said quietly. Then tell me, what do you want to do? She wrote, want to stop running, want to find other two, want to be with my kind before we all die alone, want to stop letting fear make decisions. That's suicide, I said immediately. Finding the others means exposing yourself, probably getting all 3 of you captured. She wrote, asking you to let me choose trap over cage. We sat in silence for a long time. She wanted autonomy, real autonomy. She wanted to make her own decisions about risk, about connection, about how to spend whatever time she had left. If I do this, I said finally, if I help you find the others, I can't guarantee your safety anymore. All I can do is be there with you. She squeezed my hand, then wrote, never asked for guarantees. Just asked for EOT, choice. Summer 2018, 24 years since I found her. Nora was moving slower now, gray showing in her fur. That's when she finally showed me everything. A timeline spanning decades, drawn across dozens of pieces of paper taped into a massive scroll. The timeline started in 1988, 10 years before the trap caught her. She drew her community then. 37 figures scattered across the Siskiyou Mountains, then, year by year, the population dwindling. By 1994, only 12 figures left, and she drew herself caught in that trap. This has been happening since the 80s, I said. This is multi-decade systematic elimination. She showed me more, what she remembered from captivity, Conversations overheard, procedures witnessed. She drew herself being injected with substances, monitored for reactions, blood drawn, tissue samples taken, and then something that made my blood run cold. Human figures getting sick, dying, and scientists correlating those deaths with samples from Nora and others. They were testing diseases, I said slowly, deliberately infecting you with pathogens, studying immune responses, engineering them to jump to humans. She wrote, "Yes, make weapons, test on us first. Biological weapons research. This isn't wildlife research. This is a weapons program." She showed me hash marks counting the dead, 5, 10, 15, 20. She kept counting until she reached 37, the exact number from 1988. "They killed them all," I said. "You're the only survivor from the original population." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Then showed me other regions, the Cascades, Olympics, Coastal Range, each population showing the same pattern. In 30 years, they'd reduced a population of several hundred to maybe a dozen still in the wild. "This is genocide," I said quietly. "And no one knows because no one knows you exist." She wrote, "And no one stops it because no one knows we exist. You can't commit genocide against a species that officially doesn't exist." Nora's kind had been erased twice, first through scientific skepticism, then through systematic elimination by people who knew they were real. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have done something years ago." She wrote, "Not too late. Still time to tell." "Tell who?" She wrote, "Everyone. Tell everyone. Make them see what was done. Make them care. If I do that, you become public too. You become evidence. You'll never be hidden again." She wrote, "Never been safe, just been hidden. Different things." "Okay," I said, making a decision that terrified me. "We'll tell everyone. Everything." December 2020, 26 years since that March morning. The world was in a pandemic, and I was more isolated than ever. I was 57 years old. Nora was aging. The hunters were still out there, and I'd spent 26 years protecting one life while others disappeared. I started making phone calls to journalists, conservation organizations. Most hung up on me. A few listened politely, before explaining they couldn't pursue stories about cryptids. One reporter laughed. Then I reached Elena Martinez, an investigative journalist with the Seattle Times. She didn't hang up. She asked careful questions. And finally, "Do you have direct evidence, physical proof?" "Yes," I said. "I have one living with me, have had for 26 years. The silence lasted so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, "I'm going to need to verify that claim. Would you be willing to meet in person?" I looked out at the shed where Nora spent her days. Everything I'd done for over 2 decades had been about protecting this secret. "Yes," I heard myself say, "but she has to agree. It's her life, her choice to go public." "Ms. Connolly, if this is real, this is the biggest story of the century. Your life will never be the same." I went to the shed. "I called a journalist," I said. "She's coming in 3 days to meet you, to document everything. And I need to know if that's okay, because once she sees you, there's no going back." Nora wrote, "What changed?" "Nothing, that's the problem. Nothing's changed. The hunters are still operating, your kind is still disappearing, and I've been sitting on evidence for 26 years. She wrote, "Scared? Terrified. But I'm more scared of dying having never tried." Nora set down her pencil and placed both hands on my shoulders. Then she wrote, "Ready. Been ready for a long time. Waiting for you to be ready too." Elena arrived exactly on time. I led her to the shed and opened the door. Nora was sitting in the center, waiting. When Elena saw her, I watched her face cycle through shock, disbelief, awe, and finally, determination. "My God," Elena whispered, "you're real." Nora picked up her notebook and wrote, "Yes, and they are killing us." That was the moment everything changed. It's December 2024 now, 30 years since I found Nora. The journalist's article publishes tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, the world learns that Bigfoot is real, that there's a coordinated effort to eliminate them, that I've been hiding one for 30 years. Tonight, we're sitting together in the shed one last time. She's been unusually quiet, just watching me with those amber eyes. "Are you scared?" I ask. She writes, "Yes, but also relieved. Tired of hiding." I understand. 30 years is a long time to carry a secret this big. My sister Claire, we haven't spoken in over 15 years. She gave up on me, decided I'd chosen my secret over our relationship. And she was right. "Do you ever regret it?" I ask, "that I found you?" Nora takes both my hands and looks at me with understanding. Then she writes, "You saved my life. Then you helped me find purpose. That is more than most get. But at what cost? I kept you alive, but also isolated." She places her hand over my mouth, then writes, "Stop. No more guilt. We did what we thought was right. Now we do different. That is growth, not failure." "What do you hope happens?" I ask, "tomorrow when the story breaks?" She writes, "Someone finds the other two, brings them to safety, stops the hunting, acknowledges what was done." She pauses, then adds, "And maybe someone remembers we were here, that we mattered." "I'll make sure, I promise. Whatever happens, I'll make sure people remember." She pulls me into a hug. 30 years of careful boundaries, all dissolved in this moment of shared vulnerability. When she pulls back, she writes, "Thank you for trying, even if late, even if scared. You tried." We sit in silence, watching the sunset. Tomorrow, everything changes. But tonight, we're just two beings who found each other through impossible circumstances, who built something that looked almost like family. I think about all the years I could have spent living a normal life if I'd made different choices that March morning in 1994. And I realize I wouldn't change it. Knowing Nora changed me in ways I didn't know I needed to change. Maybe I should have been braver sooner. But I can't change the past. I can only choose what happens now. Tomorrow the world learns about Nora, and maybe someone will read Elena's article and decide to act. Maybe someone will find those last two survivors. Maybe Nora won't have to die alone. Tomorrow, everything changes. Tonight, I'm just grateful I finally found the courage to try, even if it costs me everything I have left.